Hi, and welcome to the show. In this podcast, I talk with successful entrepreneurs and business people to learn how they think about relationship building, what strategies they've put into place to maintain strong connections, and how they meet new people to expand their social graph. Today, I'm talking to David A. Fields, a consultant and author. In his book, he teaches consultants how to be more successful, and the whole part of his book is dedicated to building strong and meaningful connections. So I'm super excited to have him so that we can learn from him. Let's get started.
David, thanks for being there. Let's get started with a quick intro about yourself, just so the listeners know who I'm talking to.
Okay. You want me to introduce me?
Yes, please. It's always a dangerous thing to do. So,
Oh, I don't know. Okay, well, I'm David A. Fields, and I run a small consulting group that actually, our expertise is the business of consulting. So we help build small consulting practices. I've written a couple of books, one of which I think you encountered, called The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients, which has done fairly well, and I think it attracted your attention.
yes. In this book, you advocate relationship building as a core aspect of building a successful business. Could you tell us why you think that is the case?
Sure. So I speak about consulting specifically, and this is probably true for all businesses, but I can't attest to all businesses. I just know this particular industry really well. So I'll talk about this industry, and then I'm going to go a huge leap upwards and just talk about life. Okay. So in this industry, in the consulting industry, that's very relationship driven, because consulting purchases are quite risky. Any executive who's been in business for some time and done any kind of work with consultants has had a project that has failed. And so the basic premise, the basic promise that we'll deliver and it'll work out is not one that decision makers and buyers necessarily trust. And as a result, it comes down to, who can they trust? And that's highly influenced by relationships. So it's a very, very relationship driven business. There are parts of the business that are not as relationship driven, but for the most part, that's how our business works. Now, let me just, like I said, I'm going to take a giant leap from consulting past all the other industries and all of that, just to life. My own personal philosophy is that wealth is relationship strength. That's how I live my life. That's what I believe. I think that the more rich, strong, vibrant relationships you have, the wealthier you are as a person. And that philosophy has turned out to be helpful in business. It's not a philosophy I always had. It's a philosophy that I gradually learned and adopted and decided to act upon. And it's proven to be extremely rewarding. And you're young, and I assume many of your listeners are fairly young. And in some ways, some of the best advice I could give you is to invest in your relationship banks now. Build relationships now, network now, create those bonds and invest in it now. And it will just build up much like a retirement account or any kind of savings account. The earlier you invest and the more consistently you invest, the wealthier you will become, because it grows exponentially. And that is as true of relationships as anything else. So do it now.
I love that concept of relationship with wealth. And yeah, so as you said, I'm pretty young, and I think at my stage in life, we tend to focus a lot of just building skills. That seems to be the most important thing. Just become a great developer, become a great ta-da-da. And you said that you kind of learned this on the way, that suddenly that kind of networking and relationship building is important. How did this start? How did you figure this out? It doesn't seem obvious. The obvious thing would be to say the most skilled person wins.
That's a really good question. I don't know how I figured it out. I think that eventually, probably I pissed off enough people. I angered enough people, because I'm not naturally a relationship person. That's not how I was, sort of wired from the start. And, that I realized this just isn't working. Maybe other people are important, and it turns out they are. Surprise, surprise. And again, it also just turns out to be a more rewarding, happier life. Just the same as when you focus on accumulating for yourself, you can achieve, sort of temporary plateaus and peaks of happiness. When you help others accumulate, when you help others succeed, frankly, when you help others in general, it turns out to be much more rewarding. And fortunately, I'm in a helping profession. That is the consulting business. But again, it's true in general. When you focus on others, when you focus on them rather than you, success will come. But just you'll find every day is more enjoyable.
Nice, nice. I'd like to go back to something you said before, so that people buy from people they trust. This could like be interpreted. This does sound a bit like people will buy from their friends even if they don't have the right skills or if they're not the right people. Is that something that you feel as well, or not at all? And relationships is just
Sure.
kind of an add-on.
Oh no, absolutely. People will buy from, or let's again sort of bring it back to the business context.
Yeah.
So executives will contract people that they know, that they trust, even if there are folks who they don't know as well, who are better qualified, who have a stronger skill set. And I hear about this every single day from both sides of the table. I've heard this from senior executives who are hiring consultants, because that's what a lot of my business was winning those projects. And I hear it from clients. I was talking with a consulting firm yesterday, the CEO of a consulting firm yesterday, who was saying how the stages of the relationship they have with a pharmaceutical company, one of their newer clients, has reached this stage where the decision maker will just call them for anything, even if it's not obviously inside their skill set. They just, the decision maker, the executive, trusts that the consultant will figure it out. Or if the consultant can't, if the consultant feels like, you know what, I really appreciate your faith in me, but I'm not terrific at catching the boa constrictors or the snake infestation, curing that, that the consultant will say, this isn't really where I shine. Let me help you find somebody.
Wow, got it. Well, that's fascinating, and that changes kind of the way we should look at the whole kind of how to sell ourselves. Okay, so obviously, in order, I mean, there is a saying that in order to optimize things, you have to measure them. To measure them, how would you define your kind of your network wealth today, or kind of size of your network?
So are you asking sort of like, how do you measure it? How do you keep track of it?
Yeah. Or maybe even as on a more broad level, how do you define it?
Well, from a business standpoint, at least, I recommend people look at their network and define what I call your network core, which is through a fairly simple segmentation process. Well, simple in concept, it actually takes work. So I tend to look at relationships. You can just segment them into 3 levels: A's, B's, and C's. A's are strong relationships, B's are kind of moderate relationships, and C's are people whom you've met perhaps, but with whom you really don't have a relationship. And then 1, 2s, and 3s is the level of decision making. And in business, you're trying to focus on A1s, decision makers with whom you have a strong relationship. With B1s, those are decision makers with whom you have a moderate relationship. You want to improve the relationship. And with A2s, you have a strong relationship with someone who's an influencer, not a decision maker. You want them to introduce you to the decision maker. So the real question, though, going back to what you said, is, well, what's an A, what's a B, what's a C? How do you know someone's an A? How do you know you have a strong relationship? And the kind of rule of thumb, easy guide answer to that is, well, when you reach out to them, do they reach back? Or at least most of the time. So if you reach out to your family, I hope, in most cases, they'll reach back. If I call my brother, he'll call me back. We got a pretty good relationship. If I call my sister, she'll call me back. We have a pretty good relationship. If I call my, some random person who's the CEO of Volvo who doesn't know me, the CEO of Volvo is not going to call me back. We don't have any relationship. And so someone's willingness to engage with you is a good sign of the relationship strength. Now, it may not be a positive relationship at any moment in time, but at least the bond is there, right? It's a two-way bond. You'll communicate with each other. And relationships really are about communication in some form or fashion, right? It's about connection. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yes, no, totally. And do you kind of set yourself KPIs or how do you think about like growing your relationship wealth?
Well,
is it something you do on purpose, or is it?
Well, it's
I guess it is in a
that's
sense.
Yes, it is good to keep track of your network core and how it's growing. I will I admit, and in full transparency, at this point in my career, just given what I've accomplished, I have so many incoming requests to connect, right? And I have so many people want to connect with me that it's not hard to form new relationships. But to maintain relationships takes effort. And yes, I mean, part of that is just keeping a CRM and managing it and recognizing when there are people I need to reach out to ensure that I'm keeping that bond relatively strong. And you measure it with your CRM. And in terms of daily activity or weekly or monthly or quarterly or whatever, yeah, sure, you can set some targets for yourself, and I recommend doing that.
Love it. Let's dig into this. So so you want to stay in touch with people, that's clear, you see why, and it's, as you said, it's easy to do the first connection, but to go from I just met you to we are an A type of relationship, that's a hard process. And at school, at university, it kind of comes naturally, but when it's not someone that you meet every day just because you live in the same place, how should we think about this? What's the strategy to actually build a strong relationship with someone? Is it really depending on the communication tools you use, on how often you reach out, on the quality of what you say?
Well, this goes back to probably the core concept I teach most often, which is being right side up. And right side up means you recognize that the world isn't about you. Well, at least in terms of building relationships and in terms of building business, especially. It's not about you, it's about them. So, it's interesting listening to you say, well, at university, it's easy because you see people all the time. Therefore, it's easy to build relationships. Yet, I would guess there are all sorts of people whom you see day in and day out, yet you have no relationship.
True.
So it's not simply being near to them. It's not simply propinquity, it's a good word for you. And it's not simply frequency, because my best friend lives, probably about 1,000 miles away. And we sometimes go weeks or even a month or so without ever talking. And yet, when we talk, when we pick up the phone or connect, it's like not a moment has passed. Well, why is that? And when we formed our relationship, we weren't 1,000 miles apart. Though again, one of my best friends, I've only met in person 3 times. He and his family live in another country, and and it was, I think, 10 years after we started our relationship when we actually met. So why is it that we have such a strong relationship? And it's because we make the relationship about each other. We show we care. We're genuinely interested in the other person. That's how you form a strong relationship, by expressing interest, by genuinely caring about the other person. You can form a relationship very quickly that way. It doesn't take months or years or weeks or sometimes even hours.
I see. Yeah, and I mean it's so obviously obvious, and of course, like to build a great relationship with someone, just care and actually be someone who wants to connect. Um, how does this look like? So I guess obviously it does make sense. Yeah, my question would be, so there are some people where there is some sort of natural connection, and for some reason or another, you just fall in love in a friendship way. You just it works great. But then there are people where you just know that you want to build a great relationship with them. You know that these are people that are interesting, that you can learn a lot from. But maybe there isn't like a spark that makes everything work magically. And in that case, how, how do you? Yeah, it's a weird question, I guess. But how do you start caring? If you see what I mean.
Yeah, so you're right. There are cases where it's easy, right? There are cases where, as you said, there's just sort of a natural um, coincidence of how you view the world. You connect. You find points of confluence, points of connection, parallels, and for whatever reason, whatever the biology is, you just click. And then there are times when again, you just don't. Um, there's I was talking with the CEO of a company called Zappos, who's become fairly well known now, and we talked a few times. We had the most challenging conversations because neither one of us knew what the other one was talking about. And it was like we spoke a different language, which we even talked about the fact that we use terms and we seem, those terms don't make sense in our different, worlds. So how do you build a relationship in those cases? Quite intentionally. Look, caring about other people for some people comes, fairly naturally, but for most people it actually doesn't. You care about, perhaps your family and your friends, but most of the time, even when you're listening to someone else, what you're really thinking is, how does this work for me? How should I respond? What's in it for me? Truly attending to someone else is hard work and takes practice. It is much harder than it sounds. This idea of right side up thinking, which I mentioned a moment ago, making it about them, not about you, is way harder in practice than it is in reality. I mean, than it is in sort of
Yeah, yeah.
conceptually in theory. Um, and so, how do you make any relationship? It takes work. You have to really focus on them. Pay attention. Try to picture in your mind what they're picturing in their mind when they're speaking to you.
That's an interesting one. Okay. You also mentioned using a CRM. Um,
Yes.
there is something that we come across a lot with our own startup, which is people say, oh, but if you're using a tool to stay in touch, then you don't really care. How do you address this, and what's your thinking about this? Obviously, I guess you don't use the CRM for your family, so there is kind of
Well,
a difference.
so again, it depends what you do with the CRM.
Yeah.
We don't use, nor actually do I necessarily recommend using a CRM to keep in touch. What a
Okay.
CRM can do is help you know when to keep in touch and what the stage is of a relationship or especially a dialogue, a conversation. Remember, I'm thinking about a CRM from a business standpoint and a
Mhm.
business development, winning business. And in which case you want to understand kind of what stage you're in. Did you reach out to someone? Did they call you back? That kind of thing. So we don't actually, in my business, use any kind of automated CRM. There's no like every month you're going to get, this kind of letter, anything like that. Now, everybody in my community or tribe or all my followers do get an announcement weekly of an article, but that's not really from a CRM. So what the CRM does is it says, hey, you know what? It's pick the day. Today's the day you need to call Nathan. Um,
Mhm.
that's where it works really well. Is it reminds you, and then you as the human work on the relationship.
Nice. So basically, the tool is there to help you do the boring work of remembering, but the actual work of building and maintaining a relationship, that's something you still do yourself, of course.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You should absolutely always, whenever possible, outsource your memory.
Yeah, I like that. You mentioned the newsletter that you send out on a weekly basis. How do you
Yes.
balance between, obviously at some point you start to have too many followers to be able to have a strong and personal relationship with every single one of them. But at the same point, you don't want to like become someone that no one actually talks to in real. Yeah, how do you balance between this personal outreach and the mass outreach, which you do both of?
Well, I mean, they are two pretty separate things, right? So
Yeah.
my weekly articles just go out and people read them and respond and engage and write comments and that kinds of thing. And I mean, two people.
But the email still seems pretty personal, so I'm subscribed. So I still kind of feel like, oh, okay, David took some time to write this, or maybe it's actually totally wrong, but that's how it feels.
You mean in the weekly announcement?
Yeah.
The weekly announcement just says, hey, you probably, well, that's actually interesting that you have that response. So part of the reason it's possible, and I'm totally speculating here, okay? But part of the reason you may have that sense is all my emails start with you. They don't start with I. So they will probably feel more personal because they're about you. They're not about me. And a lot of sort of mass emails are about the author or about the sender or just about a concept. And even if you look through my writing quite deliberately and with some fair amount of work is I really shy away from the sort of conceptual, theoretical, generic and just concepts. And I write about you. What should you do? Let's talk about your business. Let's talk about your life. So it's that makes it more personal. Going back a little bit to your question, I'd also separate your regular mass outreach from your personal outreach. So you're right. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who follow and read and get an announcement every single week. There's a much smaller group of people who are going to receive a personal email from me saying, hey, just checking in. I want to see how you're doing. What's the latest with your baby? Or a phone call from me. Okay, that's a much smaller group. That's personal outreach.
Totally. Okay. Could you tell us a bit about this flow? So you meet someone with whom you want to build a strong relationship. What happens next? In your book, obviously, I know you say about you talk a lot about following up. That's just the key aspect. And then what happens after this? That's where I guess it gets kind of. That's where it.
Well, what part's fuzzy to
magic.
you? Let me answer your question better. So tell me which part is confusing or makes you feel uncertain.
It's after the follow up. Is clearly you meet someone, you want to stay in touch for some reasons, and also I guess because you like this person. You follow up until there it's pretty clear, and then kind of and not necessarily kind of in the meta way of how you do this, but just the nitty gritty. Do you literally like write notes in the CRM? Do you set up a reminder for a few months? What happens next?
Sure. Well, I mean, so let's make it specific. Give me who's someone who you met recently that you want to build a relationship with.
So let's take my Swiss friend who is a consultant as well. So we had a few phone calls. He actually uses our app. And I think he's a really cool person and I want to stay in touch with. We have never met physically and we had a few email exchanges and a few phone calls.
Great.
But now, yeah.
So at the end of your last phone call, did you say, and what's his name?
Simon.
Simon? Okay. Did you say, hey, Simon, I would love to keep in touch. Can we chat again in I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, just to connect so I could see how you're doing?
No, I actually didn't.
Okay. So that was your first step.
Okay.
Right? It is seek permission and see whether it's okay to connect. Now, 99 times out of 100, Simone is going to say, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And then you say, cool, let's put something on the calendar right now. That way you're not
Nice.
wondering if I'm ever going to connect, or, and I'm not wondering in 3 months how to get a hold of you. Well, no. You put it on the calendar. And then in 3 months you call. Or 4 months or 6 months or whatever you decided on.
Okay, yeah, it's actually that simple.
Yeah.
Oh wow, makes sense. Cool. Hey David, thank you very much. I mean, we are running out of time. Maybe the last question would be, what is a common thing you see people struggling with that you coach in relationship building that just seems obvious to you now, but that doesn't for most people?
Well, the most common challenge that I see is either this fear or this doubt, this belief that when you are reaching out to someone, you're bothering them. And what I think is important to understand and embrace is that relationships in and of themselves have value, right? Relationship strength creates wealth, which means when you reach out to someone, you are giving them the opportunity to become wealthier. Not, put money in their pocket, not buy from you or you buy from them. They are giving them the opportunity to have a stronger relationship with you. That's a gift. When you reach out to someone, it's a gift. They can say no. They could choose not to pick up the phone. They can choose not to return your email. But if you don't give them that opportunity, they never get the choice. So at least give them the opportunity to gain, to win, to build a relationship with you. So that's a challenge I see. People are so afraid to reach out to other people. Just do it, really. I mean, you're doing them a favor and yourself a favor.
Fantastic close up. David, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely.